Hello everybody and welcome back to the railway once again. Today it's a slightly different video. I'm not doing any running because a lot of the videos that I've made, showing the servicing and upkeep and maintenance, all of those sort of videos have been surprisingly popular. So I thought I'd do another video showing the service of another different type of locomotive, specifically the mainline locomotives. Now these are quite old. I believe they were replaced by Bachmann, or at least the company Mainline was purchased by Bachmann and now operates as Bachmann. But there's still a lot of these mainline locomotives about on eBay, especially the 460s, which look like this. They're all different locomotives, but they all have essentially the same chassis. And it's quite straightforward to service them. It is a bit fiddly, but it really isn't too bad. It's really not too bad. So it's just going to be a quick video just showing how to service them, how to get them running nicely, because they don't run very well if you don't service them. So yeah, I thought that's what I do. So I'll show you what we're going to need. First, you're going to need something to cradle it in. Now you can buy something specifically to hold a locomotive. I don't know who do it. I think it's probably Gauge Master, something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but I just use a piece of foam. It looks like some insulation or something. I've used them for many years and they're very, very useful and very, very good. Of course, you're going to need your small selection of screwdrivers, as always, just to get in. I normally just have these two. You want 6 volts, or access to 6 volts. I believe that's working, possibly not. Now, I know the locomotives are 12 volts, but when we're just spinning the wheels gently, we don't really want them flying around at full speed, so 6 volts, between 4 and, 4 and, I don't know, 7, you don't want too much. Just to get the wheels turning so that you can clean them. You're also going to need a paintbrush. I suppose that's optional. It's got a bit of clumps scenery on it. Yeah, that's optional, but you could use air duster instead, and that's just to clean the body. That's just a cosmetic thing. You shouldn't need a file for this one. This one's very straightforward, but if you've got a file, then if you find somewhere to use it, that's fine. Oil, just light machine oil. The sewing machine oil from Amazon is very good. That's what's in here, although this is that Gauge Master oiling pen, which I've had to hot glue the top on because it leaks so horribly. I don't recommend those, really. And then you want some cleaning agent. This is not green food colouring, as always. This is just household nail polish remover, or you can use anything you like as long as you steer clear of WD-40, which I think I've explained why you shouldn't use that. And of course some tweezers. Again, it's optional, but if you spot a hair or something caught up in the wheels or the linkage or whatever, these are very useful just to snip it out, rip it out, because obviously you don't want hairs. You want this loco to run as well as possible. Anyway, let's get on. Enough rambling on. I'm going to put the tender to one side. I'll try not to forget about it, because I often do. But there's not much to do with the tender, really. Just a wheel clean. Now, the first thing I always like to do with any locomotive, whether it's mainline or not, is just give it a little brush. Now, you want to be careful, especially if it's a super detailed model. You want to make sure that you're not going to rip off any of the detailed parts. I suppose namely handrails, vacuum pipes, that sort of thing. But this is just brilliant for, well, there's a siren in the background, sorry about that. Yeah, but this is brilliant for just removing any dust or debris, especially if you don't keep the loco in its box. It just gets rid of the dust, and that's why it's optional. If you keep it in a box, it really isn't going to be an issue. Once you've done that, that's when this whatever you're going to use to hold the loco upside down comes into play. So the next thing I always do is give the wheels a clean. Now, a quick note, when you're putting any loco into this sort of cradle, you want to make sure you're not ripping off the smoke deflectors or handrails when you're putting it in, so I like to spread it out first and then lower the loco in very gently. Now, the mainline wheels don't really get very dirty. There's a few little blobs of dirt, but generally they're very, very clean locos. Let me try and get this in the shot perfectly. That's a bit better. And it's basically the same drill. Now, if your loco, if you've only just got the loco and it's not running, you could have probably saved this step till a little bit later. but you are going to want your loco running. Now, I don't really like turning the wheels and cleaning at the same time because it's very hard to avoid scratching the loco. But that's, that's up to you. Anyway, cotton buds, I forgot to mention that in the ingredients. You just need some cotton buds or any suitable cleaning agent, well, cleaning, I don't know, utensil, let's say. And all I've done is just dipped the cotton bud into the cleaning fluid, let a bit soak into it, and start to clean. So you hold the opposite wheel, obviously. Now I think that's a permanent mark on there. Now if it's really tough stains, it's going to be difficult to get them off. But I wouldn't worry too much, because as long as you're making contact, it's absolutely fine. So you clean all the surfaces that are visible, and of course you'd need to clean the bogie and truck wheels if you've got them. And then this is where the power supply comes in. So I tend to remember where the wheels are, so depending on how much of the wheels you can access, we're at about, I don't know, 11 o'clock there. So if I take it to 5 o'clock round here, that's how we can clean the other side. Now you could do it in quarters, but because I can get to most of these wheels, it's fine to do it like this. So about there, so that's turned the wheels, and this way we scratch very little, whereas if you just applied power here and just this, you're going to get, crocodile clips are going to damage the wheels, which is not ideal, of course. That's it. Just give them all a clean. On the other side, I realise you can't see exactly what I'm doing, but I think you'll get the gist. Let's try and get those cleaned. And of course, that's not bad. Sometimes they're a lot dirtier than that, but that's not bad. Now, with these wheels, you're going to want to take these bogie wheels off, because that's how we get the body off. So we'll take those off. And I probably prefer cleaning these when they're off, actually. So we'll do that. And it's just exactly the same, but it's perhaps a little easier. I'll just grip them like this, being careful not to de-gauge them. I don't think you can with these, they're fixed in place. But some of them do slip off the axles, especially the old trying ones or some Hornby ones. So just be careful. These aren't really that bad, but I would clean them anyway just because it's good practice, and then you don't forget. Right, that's clean. Now before I do take the body off, I like to oil the axles. It doesn't really matter what order you do this in, though I would suggest oiling the linkage last. Sorry, I know you couldn't see that. I would recommend oiling the linkage last, because when you've got to handle the body and the chassis, you don't really want to be taking all that oil off with your hands. So yes, that's what I prefer to do. It doesn't matter if you do it a different way at all. But yes, so oiling the axles. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. So you're going to want to pull the truck to one side because there's a screw just underneath it. You just have to get that off any way you can. It's not the easiest thing in the world to take the truck off, so I like to leave it on. And that probably isn't going to come out, so I'll let that come out when we take the body off. But you want to take out, well, this particular model has 4 screws, and assuming it's the same chassis on all the other 460s, which I think it is, it should be the same. All the ones I've got are like this, and the 460 is very common from Mainline. The collet is a little bit different, and the Class M2 is very different because it's got a different motor altogether. It's closer to a trying locomotive, the Mainline / Airfix M2. But anyway, let's see. That body's now loose. So we'll leave the body somewhere else. And this loco actually, because it's such a big chassis, can stand up on its back end quite nicely. So all we should do now is just take it by the back and lift the base off. And you're going to want to clean this if it's covered in oil, but this one isn't, which is good. And then what you've got is full access to the axles. Now at this point, if you see any hairs around the axles or anything like that, you should try and get those out, though I don't recommend taking the wheel set out, because then you'd have to take off all the linkage. and for a routine service it's not worth doing all that. Right, oiling pen, this is where that comes in, and you just want to give a generous but careful amount to each axle. Now the mainline axles have been known to fail, so if you keep an eye on those, that's also good. Now you want a little blob on the gear. It should be the rear wheel that has the gear. Let's see if it is. Let me just focus this, make sure it stays focused. In this case it's the rear wheel, as you can see. I'll just put a little blob of oil on there, not too much. And if you're happy that that's all nicely lubricated, you can then pop this back on and screw these two screws back on, though you're going to want to leave these two at the ends. You're going to want to leave that one and that one. You won't want to leave those on because they're to screw the body on. So you want to lower this thing back on. I mean, you could probably get it on by hook or by crook, but they're quite tight fitting. You just need to apply a little bit of pressure just to get them on there, and of course all the screws should line up. Let's zoom out again. I'm trying to think of the best way to let you get the best view. Now all the screws look the same, so always be careful of that. If you're taking screws out and you start to notice that they're all different lengths, you can get in a mess. So I just try and remember. But most Hornby ones, at least, and I think most mainline too, do all use the same screws, or or if they are different, they're obviously different, not very slightly different. So that's all we need to do for the wheels at this stage. So then I like to move on to the motor. Again, you can do this in whatever order. It's not up to me. This is the order I like to do it in. Now, I tend to light on its side, the chassis, for this part. Though, just be careful because of course you've got lots of delicate gear and stuff on the side. And basically what you're working on is this here. And I'm going to turn the exposure up slightly for this bit because it's quite delicate work. Now this is what you've got to be careful of, because you're going to be undoing these two screws. And when you do so, the spring and possibly the brush are going to fly out towards you. So as you're unscrewing them, I hold them in place and get the screw out. So let's do that. Make sure my arm isn't in the way. Now it's not too disastrous if you lose one of the springs. And I believe you could try the Hornby ones from the Ringfield motors, and those springs might fit as well, but it's best if you don't. Anyway, now this little brush, well let's say, I don't know, this little piece of metal comes out. You need to just gently lift it out, and there's the spring, just there. That's the spring that's just fallen out, and you want to rescue that and put that somewhere very safe, because if you lose that, that isn't especially good. And of course the little plate or bracket you need to look after as well. Now it's very important you remember which screw you took out from here and here, because they're different. One of them has to reach through to the back side of the chassis to take the electricity from that side, and the other one is shorter. So remember which one's which. I tend to leave them in the bracket so that I know. But that one was the left one, and that looks like it's the longer one, but we'll see when the other one comes out. Right, so the same drill with the other one. I'll turn this around, excuse me while I just do that. And it's the same thing. You've got to make sure that brush, that spring, sorry, doesn't escape you. Because I've had to ferret around on the floor many times looking for those flaming things. Yes, that was the shorter one. So as you can see, let me put it in. That's considerably shorter, and that one was on the right. And rescue the spring. Now the brushes often stay in there, but you can get those out afterwards. So now you should be ready to remove this this little plastic plate. So let's get that off, like that. Oh, and the whole armature's come out now. Normally that won't happen, so I'll show you what you'd normally get. There's the brushes. These are the brushes. You want to look after these as well, because they are a bit difficult to replace if you lose those. Right, bear with me a sec. Right, so this is what it'll look like when you get it out. The armature will be in here. Now before you take it out, it's worth noticing this little white washer type thing. Let's see if we can get a close-up of that. Now these are loose, these little white rings, and you want to be careful that you don't lose those. I don't take them off, but if they do come off, that's where they go. There's one on the back as well. Well, I think there's two on this one. Yep, on the back. So just be careful that you don't lose that. Now I do take this, well there's the commutator, but I do take the armature out. But again, be careful with it, because if you rupture any of the wires on it, well, the loco won't enjoy it. Now, when you take the armature out, you'll see that there's a gear exposed in there. And all I do is put a little blob of oil on it, like this. So you can see it, just a little bit. You can turn it round as well. Just make sure it's well oiled, and a little bit of oil, you know, on the hole above it, which means that the armature will turn nice and freely. Next, the armature itself, it's just a case of getting the cotton bud again. Let's get another one of those, another cotton bud, and a little bit of nail polish remover in my case. And you want to clean this off. Now this one isn't dirty at all, but it often is deceptively dirty. As you can see, it's reasonably dirty. And you just want to shine those up so they look nice. As you can see, my little white rings come off already, so you want to be careful of that. And the brushes you want to keep to one side. You don't want to put the brushes back in at this stage when you put the armature back in, though you can put a little bit of grease on the gear that's on the armature. Again, not too much with the grease. And making sure the little white washers are still on there, you just pop it back into its hole and make sure it's seated into the axle holder, or whatever it is. And that looks nice. Now there's no point trying to balance the brushes on there and then put the plastic casing back on, it's just not going to work. But the brushes do fit through these holes, so you can just do it like that, as I will demonstrate. So that goes back on, and providing it's the right way, it will click back in. There we go. That's the most part of the service done. Now it's just reassemble, put all the wheels and things back on, grease the linkage, and give her a try. Right, let's look. Now you pop the brushes back in. Now I used to clean the brushes, but there's actually very little point in doing that because they're sort of almost self-cleaning. There's a lot of friction going on. But if you want to clean them, by all means do, but because they're quite hard to come by, I don't like cleaning them because it wears them out even more unnecessarily. I'm trying to get these back in. It's a bit awkward getting the brushes back in the holes, but it's not too bad. You can normally do it in the end. If you really want to, you can just use some tweezers, which I might have to do with this one because I'm going to be here trying for a long time. So let me see what I've done with them. They go in the end. It's always a bit awkward actually getting those in, but it always works in the end. Now, don't put both the springs in at the same time. I'll put one in first and then deal with that, and then deal with the other one. So just one first. It just goes in over the brush, doesn't matter which way obviously. Same with the brushes go in whichever way. Well, I suppose clean side up. Alright, so remember the screw that is the longest goes on the left, and with the spring standing upright like this, you just pop the spring over the top of it. I know you can't see this too well, and push it down, holding it in place like that while you screw it in. Again, if you accidentally release this, the spring could ping away and it's a long hunt, assuming you ever find it at all. I've lost a couple in my time. Screw that back in snugly. You don't want this to be loose. Let's try that again. There we go. Nice and tightly. Not so tightly that you'll never get it off again, but nice and tightly. Right, the second spring goes back in. Again, I don't know how easy it is to replace these springs if you lose them. I've never had to try, luckily. Yep, so the shorter screw goes in next. I'm hoping you'll be able to see this a bit better. So the spring's upright again. Pop that on top of the spring. And then screw that in. I know you can't really see, but you can tell what I'm doing. and it's just essential that the spring is nice and straight, and that should work. Now if it doesn't work straight away, don't worry, because if it just depends on the position of the commutator. But you can test it by taking your voltage again, just like this, and just applying very quickly to the two sides. Now this doesn't always work straight away, so I'm going to put the full 12 volts in, because you'll need to then run it on the tracks for a little while. But as long as you get something like that, you know that you've at least put the brushes in the right way, and you put the screws in the right sides, and you're not going to get any running issues with it, and it's not shorting or anything like that. So that's good. So we know it's working. We know that the brushes are in place correctly and the springs are making contact with them and whatnot. At this point I would recommend putting the body back on before you start reattaching the wheels and oiling the linkage, because you don't really want to be touching it after you've oiled the linkage. You want to let it run for a little while. So this lowers back in. Now it's worth pointing out, if the inside of the body is a little bit greasy, let's see, like that, I just take a dry cotton bud and just give it a clean out, because the less unnecessary grease you've got loose in there, the better. So just make sure it's clean on the inside. It's more of an issue with trying locos really, because those motors do throw a lot of grease out. But with Mainline 2, it's worth just making sure the inside of the body's clean. And then you just place the chassis back into the body. Now there's no hooking mechanisms or anything, you just drop it back in. Because there's two screws, it can just drop in and you screw it back in. Now if you remember, I left this screw in place, so I'll just screw that one back in now. Not all the way, because the other one's not in yet. The other screw goes in at the back, as you remember. This is a magnetic screwdriver, so it's a bit easier. It's very difficult to get the back screw in sometimes, so a magnetic screwdriver is possibly the way to go. And we'll screw the front one in all the way now. That's it, yep, that's secure. Right, now because the bogie wheels are perfectly insulated and it's a plastic bogie / truck, you don't have to pay attention to which way the wheels go, so you just slip them in. And if you didn't see how I took these out earlier, by the way, it's just the case of pulling them out. They're all quite easy to get out. Let me move this so you can see it. So you just place it in, like that, in place, and then just click it in, like that. And that goes in. Right, nearly ready. Just take the oiling pen and put a little blob on every moving part. So big one, bigger one there, tiny ones on each side, and little bits on these moving parts. And I like to put a bit around the valve as well, on every moving part. And then flip around and do the other side too. Very easy. And it's quite easy to get these locos running well, but having said that, it's very, very easy to get them running poorly as well. And if they haven't been serviced for 6 months or so, you'll notice that, I reckon, because I often notice just how badly they run if you're not servicing them regularly. Right, tender time. I'm just going to give it a little brush with the brush. Make sure all that dust's away. Now this is kept in my little tender cabinet, so it's not really that bad. And the wheels are clean as well, but if they're dirty, again, you just get your cotton bud and clean them like that. Make sure the tender's well cleaned, and we'll see if the locomotive works now it's all back together. Okay, so the loco and the tender are both on the line. And what you basically want to do is give them about 10 to 15 minutes of running, very, very slowly to start with, as slow as you dare, because you remember there's a lot of oil that you've placed on the gears and whatnot, so you want to make sure that that's all worn in before you turn up the speed, otherwise it will all go flying everywhere. But essentially, there won't be much of a difference to start with, but you know, as you run for 5 minutes, all your lubricant's going to start working into them, into all the different parts, and hopefully you'll start to see some improvements. So, I'm hoping she's going to work full stop, but I'll let her do one lap slowly and then speed her up to about 6 volts or 6 o'clock, and sorry, or 12 o'clock, and we'll see how we go from there. So let's see for forwards. Yep. So a bit jerky, but once we get her happy, there we go. That's nice and slow, and that's actually very smooth. That's not bad at all. Right, I'll be back with this in a minute then, going a little bit quicker, and we'll see how she's running. Okay, back in a minute. Right, so she's chugging along very happily now, as you can see. No complaints there, running very nicely. So I hope that video is helpful to you if you've got a mainline loco that you're looking to service. I'm sorry that you've not been able to see too well what I've been doing, but I hope you've managed to get the general idea. I've been doing a lot of servicing this week, so that's why there's not been many videos out. But hopefully there's going to be a little bit more running in the weeks to come. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you all very soon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Thanks, guys.